Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. All right, welcome everybody to this next episode of Revenue Rewired, our podcast talking about how to scale your business using marketing and sales as a team. Hi, Jay.
Hello.
So today we want to talk about scaling and breaking and how to avoid breaking things when you scale. Because really, it's ultimately, I think, what a lot of businesses are trying to do. So it feels like building a house of cards, right? So your Atlantic City episode talking about the dreaded claw machine, or maybe it was fun. For you, it was fun. I think you're weird and everyone else
Thank you.
hated that
Appreciate that.
machine. But we did get the what were they? The little aliens out of Toy Story. What were they called?
I don't remember. That's a cute
Little
picture.
guys. So cute. Yes. And so, yeah, I forgot about them in the claw machine. But all right. So, Jay, a house of cards, metaphor for scaling your business. How does that sound to you? Is that right?
Yeah. Again, I know that's unfortunate. I thought about it from a negative perspective. I also did really enjoy playing with that, and I still do to this day. You can often find me on vacation sitting at the pool, trying this, and of course, the wind is never my friend. Um, but again, it touches on what we talked about a few times the last couple shows is that foundational discussion. Because again, we think about House of Cards, or not the Tower of Cards, whatever you want to call it, is if you don't have a really strong base layer, this whole thing is going to come crumbling down after you get maybe one or two more layers up, regardless of the wind or not. So I think a lot about when it comes to not only for our own agency, but for our clients, that if we don't have a strong foundation around systems, typically tied to the tech stack, it's just no matter how much money you throw at the marketing or sales tactics, it's eventually going to implode.
Yeah. And I think it's only going to get more complicated. It's not unachievable to unpack the complexity or the spaghetti junction of technology that businesses are having to cobble together to kind of get all these systems and things to talk, which is kind of amazing, but it's also really overwhelming from a scalability perspective because you don't know what you don't know. And so before you start, dumping stuff into your system or trying to scale, you kind of have to pause and step back. So the first thing that we wanted to chat about was, when you do try to scale or you do scale, it multiplies what's broken. So what happens, for example, on the sales side? Like what's a red flag that we know we're scaling something that's broken?
Um, I think that typically when I hear about this from talking with our, clients or our team, often it comes from a place of frustration with our client sales teams. And so we'll hear things like either extremes, either we've been chasing down these leads that are complete junk because they aren't responding to us, or we've heard, unfortunately, tied to either that or lack of good systems in place, the reps are missing out on opportunities where it's kind of like a needle in the haystack. A good lead is getting lost in the whole entire process because they're chasing what we might be junk leads. And so it's almost again, I think the house of cards analogy you brought up is a really good one here because think about that. If marketing isn't strategic and jumping a bunch of leads to sales, and sales team is chasing down junk leads and not able to get to good leads, then eventually what's going to happen is they're just going to be frustrated because they aren't hitting their quotas and they're just going to get burnt out. And then now all of a sudden that company who's invested a lot of money and time in not only recruiting but onboarding those people, the reps are going to get burnt out because they aren't hitting their goals and getting the compensation they desire, and then they're going to leave. So you have this really negative situation going on where I think you're eroding not only trust but also efficiency.
Mm, yeah, that's pretty icky. So you would say, I would say actually You could also go with either one overdoing it. So if you've got like this massive influx of leads, for example, and then sales can't handle it. So that's, starting this bottleneck of, well, if they can't handle it, then you're not getting the data to feed back to marketing in a timely fashion either. So there's a lot of like friction points, I think, just between those two departments that could break. So, you know, have we ever had an experience, and I know we have, where scaling actually made things worse?
We have obviously a leading question there. There's a fair number of examples that are coming to my mind, but the one that it happened, this was pre-COVID. So I know we've done a lot to address this in the past, but we have had a couple clients where things were going so well, and that organization decided they really wanted to, become elite and made some, I wouldn't say a BHAG, but close to it in the next years of revenue goals. And so then they came to us, 11th hour, and it was like, we're going to go ahead and double our ad budgets because we want to get, more things in place. And I think where we made a mistake on that one that, I have some regrets about is it was super exciting. Everything seemed like it was buttoned up. We did that. Fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, the traffic and everything else did double. But I think what we noticed is that there's definitely a diminution of returns when it comes to the ad spend side because you look at things like Google. They're a publicly traded company, and often we have found that as you increase your budget to a large enough amount, the the awareness they give your campaigns a lot looser than you would hope. And so when you're moving so quickly, no matter how strategic you are around your ideal client profile, if you don't look at all the steps through the process, you're going to uncover that you're going to probably miss out on where you have some gaps. And so again, there, just by doubling ad spend, yes, it could generate more opportunities. But then what's going to happen is if you don't think through, well, worst case scenario here, if you actually do this and it does work well, is the sales team even ready to be, flooded with all of this noise? And so now if they haven't not only doubled the marketing side, but also doubled the sales side, then the problem we just talked about, a couple minutes ago is going to be the exact same situation, but maybe even worse because now everyone's going into it with this amazing energy of like, yes, we got approval from our leadership team to double our budgets. Let's do it. And then marketing goes. They probably give a heads up to the sales, but I don't think sales maybe has the trust that they're going to see those kind of results and they aren't well prepared. And so in that situation with that client, um, we turn the campaign on. There's always going to be a little bit of slowness in how fast the results happen. They happen a lot faster with that one client, but all this stuff started happening when their sales team was working on two big things, planning, and they were at an end of year conference. And
Oh,
so
yuck.
now, so we started getting so many calls of like, stop, slow down. And unfortunately, at that point, the engine, the train has left the station. And so I think now the client wasn't mad at us because it really wasn't our fault per se, but I do take some accountability there that we've done a really good job over the years on making our mission about aligning sales and marketing. And I feel like we could have done a much better job at having the worst case and best case scenario conversations to make sure that everyone was prepared for the good and the bad. And so that's where I think, again, a real world example is that just by, applying things to make scaling improve, I do feel like that short term it was painful. But, our clients saw it as a big opportunity where like, wow, if we didn't do this, we wouldn't realize that we did have some significant gaps on that, marketing to sales journey. And so it did improve the conversations for the next year. And then obviously for us, we benefited from that a bit because now we can start having those more proactive chats with our clients. So that kind of issue never would happen again.
Mm. Yeah, and also recognizing like activity and momentum are completely different things, right? Like for me, I would define momentum as showing ROI. because ultimately that is the goal. What's the revenue? Is it increasing? Because momentum should, in fact, build that. If nothing else is changing other than your metrics, that's not revenue, it probably would be, it would feel to me just like activity. So
Yep.
that does
I,
segue into a nice, of course, you agree with me, segue
well,
into our
I was just
next.
gonna add one comment real fast on
Mm.
that, 'cause I think that's an interesting point, and I think this is an area now I'm reflecting a bit on that one client situation is that what we did do. I know I'm poo-pooing us a bit here because I'm a little harsh on us, as you know, but what we did a good job with that situation was, which I think turned into the issue, is we did create like kind of like a checklist. Again, to the momentum side, we often will build out these to-do lists and then we check off the boxes. And I realized from that process, by checking off boxes on a checklist doesn't mean you're creating clarity. And so again,
Mm.
all of that scaling stuff, it makes more meetings, you get more tools you want to try out, you start building more dashboards, and then you're just really not closing more deals. And so it's just not creating the growth that you want. And so that's where I think you want to maybe move into maybe the next conversation of what we can do around that. But I wanted just to share that comment that no matter how diligent you are about being prepared, there's often things that you're not clear about where the challenges or the opportunities might lie.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, like where human oversight can get a little wrapped up in the process of things. Like I've checked it off the list, but again, this is sort of where sales and marketing have to like get together in the same room and have the conversation, which, those marketers are like, woo, we're kegging it up, party time. We did our job, we nailed the leads, and sales is like in the back room crying, thinking like, great, so much. This is awesome. We're drowning and we don't know what to do about it. So I think you would never want that situation. And the good news is we had that experience because we learned from it. So going into like our next part here is how would you do like a pre-scale prep? Like maybe what would you do differently for this client in order to prepare them and prepare their agency or marketing team to scale and their sales team on a holistic revenue driven path?
So I think this ties in really well to what we chatted about on the last episode about the whole flow map audit or pre-scale audit. They're pretty similar. It just the desired outcome is a little different. So your intentional questions you ask are often, customized based upon, the desired outcome there. So from a pre-scale auditing, my whole thing would be is let's avoid that mistake I kind of gave the example for and fix the gaps first. And so I think that's where really smart questions come into play of asking, again, the unified team, hopefully the sales and marketing group, the same questions. And in theory, if the company is ready for scale, the answers to those questions should roughly be the same. Obviously, it might be a little different tone from a marketing versus sales, but overall the end should be similar. So there are a couple questions I do want to share that again we thought through since that one client example that's been helpful for us. And so you obviously start out on the strategy part is are we on the sales and marketing team crystal clear with 100% confidence on our ideal client profile? And if the answer is yes to that question, then not that I want to call BS on it, but then the question or the next part would be is does our data reflect that? Because
Mm.
we've run into situations where our client is beyond confident about that, and I think our job not to be being like I told you so, not that's not a good partner, but instead is let's make sure that we're looking at the data to verify it's correct. And we have found numerous times that 80/20 rule comes into play, but unfortunately on the negative side where 80% of the leads are not all aligned with those ideal client profiles. And when we start asking the questions why, we get a lot of excuses, I would call it. So it might be like, oh, we agreed last minute to do this trade show and it was the wrong audience, and that's why we got a bunch of bad leads from that. Or we just tried out this new random lead magnet and it got a bunch of bad leads. And so I'm fine with the testing idea. But if it's consistently 80% of the leads are coming from that, that obviously is a big conversation we need to have because everything needs to be tied into that. And then the second one from there is do our sales and marketing teams agree on what a qualified lead looks like? And so again, that one is where we often get a bit of a different answer where the marketing team will be like, check, 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 demographics, psychographics, we're good to go. But then sales is like, we messaged them and they never responded back after one touch point. And marketing is like, well, with the world we live in now, you have to probably have 7 to 10 touch points. And so I think there we have to define what a qualified lead looks like. And then from there, assuming that you have the qualified leads, is the follow-up process both documented and being followed? And so with that one, we often have found there's a huge amount of opportunities in that one question where we'll find that there are some rough documents in place, but no one's consistently following it. And person A is doing X and person B is doing Y, and it's a complete mess. And then from there, I think it's just looking at the tech stack and making sure that, if you did double the activities from the scaling side, will the system be able to handle it all without doing a bunch of manual, hacks and, Zapier and type of stuff? And then from there, it's like, what are the friction points we have in our funnel and are we fixing it? Because there you might find that it's not a marketing problem or a sales problem, it might be a technology problem. Like, for example, we had one client where they had a checkout process on their site for a workshop that they were selling, and it was like I don't know, a 10 or 11 step process to complete the order. Like, no matter how eager you are, after about 3 steps, people get very frustrated. And that was a
Mm.
huge friction point. And so marketing was doing a good job of driving awareness and sales was doing a good job for the few leads they got. But the problem was that the system capturing leads was broken or causing too much friction. So I feel like those were a handful of questions that I would really think about. And obviously, from there, based upon those answers, you just got to dive in deeper regarding where you see the biggest opportunities.
Yeah, I would use the flow map, but I would add this like qualifier onto it as to how much of the work that's happening is it manual. I think we really vastly underestimate how much manual work goes into day-to-day jobs in the majority of industries because people are really freaking smart and they will find ways to make things easier, faster, more efficient. And I wouldn't say it's out of laziness, that's out of necessity because they're getting more work put their way. And I love finding efficiencies. And one of the ways in which I do that is by looking for like manual things, or sort of putting my ear to the grindstone, so to speak. And where am I hearing pain points about it took me forever to do this? I often will go, okay, is it a skills thing?
Hmm.
Is it a people process? What's the issue here? And often it's like a manual thing that it can be 100% taken care of by an automation or, using someone else with the skill set that's already done that, or whatever reasons you have for fixing it. But if you look at like the manual work, that will break you faster than anything when you're trying to scale.
I love it. Totally agree with you.
Okay, so I know our listeners are dying to know, okay, like what does smart scaling look like? So, you and I have talked about when someone is ready for this, they answer questions differently. The conversations that are happening from a high level organization alignment are totally different. What do you say this is what a smart, scalable company sounds and looks like?
God, I have so many thoughts on this one. I
Give
think on
us your
the
top two.
Okay, so I think for me, there's probably um, two obvious ones, and so this is a little bit of a leading thing from all the chats we've had recently. But I think when it comes to sales and marketing, if they answer or define our questions in a similar way, that alone to me is a really good indication that we have a strong foundation to work off of. Because it's just too painful if think about like a GPS on a car. If marketing team is heading west and sales team is heading east, no matter how much you drive, in theory, you're not going to get reconnected. And so I think that is, I think, a really, really important one. And then with that, an indication that this is working well, and I've only seen this for a handful of companies, and when I see it, I get over the moon excited, is if the dashboards that we're using to help measure, all the KPIs are in a kind of a shared environment, that gets me kind of excited because it shows that at least on the executive dashboard side, that they're thinking about marketing and sales being a unified front. So that way, then, when leads, are coming through, they don't fall into a black hole. And then, you look at like the customer success team and they aren't struggling because in theory, you're delivering the revenue that your team can properly support. So I just love when I see that unified front with sales and marketing because it does give your company a better fighting chance that you're going to have lifetime value with that company or client or customer you just sold.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're saying is the company's moved toward a revenue ops centric type of management style, which is integrating all of the departments, which makes complete sense. It's like ingredients in a recipe. For me, it's when you have, and it's really sad right now, like tech industries in particular are just churning through people. And, even on the recruiting side, they're just churning through people. Like, I don't know, just opening up jobs that don't really exist or they have no intention of filling. Your retention is probably one of the biggest ways in which smart companies have prepared to scale because you have so much tribal knowledge, whether you like it or not. Everyone who comes into your organization is becoming a brand ambassador. And if you're churning and burning through people, there's just no amount of tools that's really going to replace that. Even with AI, it still needs a human centric oversight, a strategic guidance. It's garbage in, garbage out. And if you are continuously cycling through individuals, it's it's gonna show. Cracks are gonna show on your service side, on the morale side. You can always tell when someone gives you that little positive, uplifting, like even if it's a bot, if it's got a positive spin on it and you're going in with a problem, it kind of eases off the tension a little bit. And in an organization that is churning through people, you're going to have a morale issue. You're going to have a data retention, information retention. It just creates so many problems. We have people centric organizations. That's what the world is made out of. So by ignoring that, I think businesses set themselves up for failure. But the ones that handle it really well and have good policies in place and work to improve their culture, I think that is one of the biggest ways to scale smartly, in
Mm-hmm.
my humble opinion.
I 100% agree with you. That was good stuff.
So, one of the things too we talked about was from the leadership side of things. Let's talk about smart scaling as it pertains to like a top-down approach. So you talked about sales and marketing, but let's go up a level where we've seen that show up. What kinds of conversations are kind of like beige flags
Hmm.
for to scale or not to scale?
That's
What
really
is the
funny.
question?
Well, and again, I'll use us as an example, and obviously we're a much smaller business than our clients, who are much larger size, and so their complexity is definitely a bit more challenging. It's harder to kind of turn that ship sometimes. But when I think about ourselves, and it happened, I don't know, probably about 4 or so years ago, is the conversation around sales velocity inside of like our leadership meetings the the conversations changed significantly, going from a shift of 90% being about what's broken, to it maybe being 10% what's broken and more about what's next. And so we were thinking all about the vision of the organization of where we are and where we want to go. And it just really made the conversation so much different when we started thinking about it, like, okay, you know what, we're good enough. We've gotten, our CRM data is clean and we trust it. Our sales cycle is really refined and our ICP isn't confused or stalled. And everyone's rowing in the same direction and we're not pointing fingers anymore. Like those are the kind of things that I get excited on the leadership side where, the conversation are less about strategies and tactics for marketing and sales and more about the company as a whole, as far as, where can we take this next to help more people? Are there new markets? Is there enhancements to our products or services? Is there a new organizational adjustment we can make to reduce friction internally and externally? So those like big opportunities where you're stopping, looking in the rearview mirror and just constantly chasing down past issues and focusing more about intentional growth, I find that to be so beyond exciting. And so when we practice that here, and then we have those conversations with our clients who are just feeling a little tired sometimes, I don't blame them because, again, they might have a sales team of 100 to 200 people. With those kind of organizations are in place, it's just challenging because you could have a couple handful of bad apples that are making it really hard for you to think a big picture. So that's where I think, leadership should be setting aside time where they're not discussing big leadership changes and vision changes and adjustments in the meeting where they're discussing problems. Because it's really hard to think tactically about solving an issue that you feel like a short-term pain is going on when you're also trying to solve long-term opportunities.
I actually, I'm going to be writing about that today because I was
Oh.
thinking about surviving versus thriving, and that's kind of what you're saying is surviving is just like, can we just get through this day?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the problems? And it is hard to like live in your future, which is, I want to, we're thriving and here's how we move forward. And it's also where businesses can't set it and forget it and rest on their laurels, which you have to recognize. We used to get dinged for like not celebrating our wins enough or like move on to the next thing, which is okay, but not great because you still aren't taking time to go, what did we do right? There is a little bit of like, maybe let's pause. Could we potentially innovate on this? Could we make some efficiencies? Like, yes, it worked, but does anyone see, like retros typically happen with negative things. Do we do retros on like the most successful project of the quarter? I think that would be like a survive to thrive type of conversation, and that's where you can go, yeah, let's scale this thing because it's already working. We're going to shave off this little bit, and it's just going to make it so much faster. I mean, look at race cars. It's like a millisecond, or even the Olympics. Just the tiniest little shave off of inefficiency makes the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that in the swimsuits of what was it, the early 2000s. Made all the difference. All right. Well, Jay, do you have any final thoughts to add for our listeners who really want to scale but don't want to break things in the process?
Yeah, I think again, I've been in the shoes of people that are going through this many times, and what I don't want to do is we just said a lot of stuff, and they're like, I don't even know where to start. So I would like to maybe end on like one step that they could do. And I already kind of touched on this, 10 or so minutes ago, but that friction conversation is one that I would recommend can easily be done today because it does address both short and long term things. And so, what my advice would be is from the sales and or marketing team or together, it's like you could set up a 30 or 60-minute meeting with the team, and you could pull up the data around your funnel and just start thinking about like where are we losing the most momentum. That question alone could help the marketing team on where they're seeing wasted spend and the sales team on where they're having issues on their sales process. Either maybe it's unclear messaging or maybe there's a laggy follow up with one of the steps, that they're doing with touch points. So my final note for this show would be is have the conversation with your teams and try to walk away from that meeting with what's one thing we could fix better to improve and be ready or enter this scaling phase. And I think that people will feel really, really proud about like, oh, we uncovered this one thing that might sound small, but it could make a significant difference on getting the opportunity coming in your way and then earning trust faster of that prospective new client.
I like it.
How about you?
Ooh, I would say is like if I'm thinking about my operational brain, the first thing I would want to do is hopefully you have a system where you're tracking like your leadership meetings. Hopefully there's like some visibility. You don't have to be in all of them. That feels like very micromanagey, but I would kind of back it up and go, I really want to understand, and maybe you do pop into a couple meetings. what are the conversations that are happening right now? Like what is actually maybe getting swept under the rug in the sense that it's just too much and no one wants to deal with it. So it's kind of like you see a hat in the middle of the floor, you're at a party. Does anyone ever pick up the hat? No, it just sits on the floor forever. You see that all the time. So, what are the things that might be holding up the leadership team because they might be in a habit of not having the conversations that are strategic and thoughtful and innovative because they're consistently solving problems? I would want to get my leadership's mentality into a better place where they can start thinking that way because in order to get them to think scalability is possible, they have to get out of the weeds of the day to day.
I love that. And you've done a great job with that with us, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, I know it's hard. It's easy to say and hard to do. I know that even for us, when you started doing that with us, it's like running to danger and avoiding ruinous empathy and all the things that, we were not realizing we were doing. As you've been helping us make our leadership team stronger and having those harder conversations, I feel like that's been half the battle. So thank you for, being so resilient around, and focus on those kind of things because it is so important.
Yeah, we have a super solid leadership team, which helps. Well, everybody, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. And please, as always, send your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and visit us or chat with us. We'd be happy to have a conversation. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a
Thanks,
great
everyone.
day.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.